Okay, so for now you can have yourself on mute. And I would like to introduce Leo Espana. He works for Arlington County. He is the Parent Education Coordinator for the Department of Child and Family Services. And we're so excited that he's joining us tonight. So thanks, Leo.
Thank you, Laura. I'm excited to be here with like 1,000 other people virtually, apparently. So no, for the record, Laura said there was going to be like 12 of you. So I just want to make that very clear. Excuse me for a minute. I will have a PowerPoint so you have something to look at, and I want to show you that. Okay, now can I get thumbs up if you guys can see that? Okay, so now we are doing a condensed, so I'll start with, my name is Leonardo Espana. I go by Leo. I am the Parent Education Coordinator. I am not speaking about parents or education tonight. This is sort of my third passion project, as it will. And it's close akin to parenting, but it's more akin to ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and the impact that that can have on brain development, and how we can help ourselves, our communities, our families, etc. And I'll go into that. I do work for Arlington County, and this is I don't want to say abbreviated, but it is a slideshow of a conversation that can take hours, days, months, years. Okay, so but I wanted to give you a tiny bit of what we mean by ACEs. What does it mean? What do we do? And how can we help? Right. So this is sort of the overlapping conversation. This presentation was originally created, as you can see on the bottom, by ACE Interface, by certain people, both taking together the ACE study and then community efforts, and they created ACE Interface. And is how do we integrate the ACE study into what we do in communities, and how do we make it work for our community's resilience? And that's why they named it Understanding Adverse Childhood Experiences. That's what I mean when I say ACEs. Right? And then building self-healing communities. We'll talk about what that looks like and how we can sort of work our way towards that. So the first thing that we want to impart is that memory is the memory of our experiences stored in our body. You might have heard the phrase, the issues are in our tissues, meaning that what we go through while we develop is literally in our tissues. It's in our brain development. It's in our neural connections, and it'll affect us for the length of our lives. The length of our lives, yes, the length of our lives. Now, I will say this because this is something that is not usually reinstated in these type of presentations. That we're going to focus on sort of adverse childhood experiences, because guess what? Resiliency is also built on positive childhood experiences, because what we're saying is that the memory of our experiences is stored in our body. The body doesn't choose which experiences are stored, it just stores, right? So take that in mind when we're talking about all this information. Now we talk about this because from a public health standpoint, right? This is one of the greatest discoveries of our time. This is one of the biggest things as we learn about development, as we learn about brain chemistry, as we learn about long-term impact and intergenerational transmission. This is one of the greatest I don't want to say inventions, but discoveries, right? Because it can have such a profound effect on how we operate, both me professionally and personally. Okay, so little 101, I was talking to Laura and I was saying I could spend at least an hour on brain. We're not going to do that today. We're going to give you sort of basic. So we talk about the human nervous system, right? And it's how it operates functioning throughout the body. It starts at the brain, goes through the spinal cords, and then we have peripheral nerves, right? Basically, every input that comes from the outside world passes through the central nervous system. Pain, pleasure, heat, cold, everything is just a signal that says, hey, I prick my finger, it goes through my central nervous system and into my brain. And then the neuroscience and the brain, it's fairly new to us, right? A lot of us who are younger just keep hearing this information. This is in the last 20, 30 years. We did not know that the amount of information that we know about the brain until now. And that lets us open a window into brain development, especially in the first, let's say, 10 years of life. So I want you to think of something, and this is what we see are two different childhood experiences. In the experience above, you have a child who might be in danger, either perceived or physical, right? Because sometimes they might be witness to violence, for example, in the home, in their community, so they sense danger, right? When a child is afraid. What that does is in the brain, and usually they use this sort of like mechanism in the brain where when I perceive danger, you go into fight, flight, or freeze. That makes the brain go survive, 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 right? Especially in children because their brain doesn't know any better. And what that happens is you create an adaptation. That's what we have here. Because the child learns to survive in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. My brain is saying there's danger. I learn to survive. And then as an adult, that adult survives in the worst of conditions because it's used to that stimuli that says danger, 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 danger. Okay. Now on the bottom, you have a child who has experienced safety in their environment, who doesn't necessarily have that notion of fear, or their brain is not as sensitive to that fight, flight, or freeze response. Their adaptation is they trust people, the process, and there's possibility. These children are usually hopeful, right? Because they have no reason not to be. All they've known is safety. And that person can thrive in the best of conditions, but usually has a hard time surviving worst of conditions. Does that make sense? So it's not good, bad behavior. It's not positive or negative behavior. It's different adaptations for different scenarios, right? That's when we have this clash of adaptation and expectation. What's the expectation for the child? And how does their adaptation to that environment clash? It says there, when biology collides with social expectations, we run into trouble. I give this example every time. So if you have a child who's undergone this path up top, and I'll give you a perfect example that some of you might have seen in our community. You have a child who does not have enough food at home. Okay. Now they know that in their home, they either have a lot of siblings or there's scarcity or there's poverty where they have to seek out and protect food. Okay. And there might be hunger in the home. That child has learned to survive, has learned to have this food seeking behaviors, right? And has learned to keep to themselves. Now here, I don't want to go into adult functioning, but when that child enters about the age of 4 or 5, enters the school system, we have a saying in our school system. Put it in the chat if you remember. And it even rhymes and has to do exactly with that. Let me see if somebody is getting 20 bonus points. Nobody till now. Where when that child goes to school, they tell him sharing is caring. Right? They tell him sharing is caring. Not only is sharing caring, but if I don't share, it is seen as, and they love this word because it sounds super smart, maladaptive. Now the child is showing maladaptive behaviors in a classroom because he's not sharing with his friends. He is not being a good classmate. He is not being a good person. He is not being giving or compassionate towards others. Right? That is a very small example, but that can seem real, and that only exacerbates as the child gets older. Because as the child gets older, he learns, his cognitive functioning improves, and maladaptive is no longer used. Now the child may be combative. Now the child may be disruptive, right? Because the adaptation is different depending the social setting. We go back to this. The expectation is clashing against that adaptation, okay? Because that child has been, I don't want to say groomed, but that child has been molded by his experience. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. I'm going to give you one quick example on, this is a trauma-informed school discipline. This was actually enacted. Most of the research in this community is actually from Washington, the state of Washington. They've enacted this research in almost every level in their communities. This was something that was used in high school. And what they found is when you have a child who has ACEs or has had adverse childhood experiences, when they go into fight or flight, one, they go into fight or flight easier. So whenever I feel threatened, my brain goes, bah, 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 right? I do that sound because it's overwhelming. When you go into fight or flight, it's not rational. It's your brain hijacking your thinking system and going into like, you need to do something now. Okay. And what they found is that when these students go into fight or flight, we have to do something about it, because usually what we do is that we attack the behavior head on. And that is not, it didn't seem to be working, because the student wasn't in a place where they could have a conversation, right? Or they could de-escalate, or they could do something productive to rectify whatever conflict they're having. So what they found out is they found this sort of system, and the student can provide feedback. Okay. Now in the outer end, you're red, and the student can say, hey, I'm red, right? And that means that we're waiting a day. We don't have to have this conversation right now. We'll wait a day so the student can have a chance to calm down, and then we'll have a conversation. If we're at yellow, we can wait an hour. Okay. We can allow that student to calm down, and we can have a conversation, or we're ready to talk. Where I'm at a space where my brain hijacked has gone away, and I've calmed down, and we can do something about it. Very interesting thing is, this does not mean to qualm. I'm a limit guy. This does not mean that you don't have a conversation. This does not mean that the student goes home. It doesn't mean that they're not accountable to their behavior, right? That's why it's trauma informed. It doesn't mean that the student gets a pass. What it means is that we get to a better place where I can better comprehend you, and we can have a conversation about what happened and how we can do it better moving forward. And I'm not making this up. I don't have my notes in front of me because I rarely use notes. But guess what? It works. And that high school saw a reduction by like 40% of incidents after they enacted this sort of discipline, right? So it works. That's the other thing with it works. Okay. So, she's fairly famous at this point. I was telling Laura that I used to, jot these things out, and people were like, now everybody knows her, and she has like, I don't know how many books, but this is a Brené Brown video. I like it. If not for the usual reasons, is because we're going to connect with connection that she's going to talk about. And I want you to recognize within the video, not just the video and the empathy piece. Yes, because you might have seen the video before. I want you to hear about what she says about connection, because that's going to be pivotal for us going forward. And I need to add the sound. So hopefully you guys can hear it. Yes, there we go. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it, please. It'll start in just a second, hopefully. Or not.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing
Did the sound get blocked?
Yes.
Okay. Every time I forget that every time that I click out, the sound. It's okay. Let me see. Let me try that again.
You're not sharing your screen anymore either.
Oh, okay. I know what happened. There we go. Okay, let's try that again. I'll rewind it, guys. Don't worry.
think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when...
Is it sharing sound? Can you guys hear it? Yes, okay.
Someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, No. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot. So if you have any thoughts, opinions on the video, place them in the chat. We'll bring them because I believe it's very, very poignant. I've seen it, I don't know how many times, and it always works. And it wasn't until a couple of days ago, I think last week, that I used it for another class, that I remembered how much it underlines that connection piece. And we're going to talk about that going forward. Okay, so you've heard me talk about it a couple times. Nobody's asked anything, which I'm very proud of. Nobody said, what is ACEs? What is the ACE study? Okay, so I'm going to tell you. The first thing that I want to show you is this is the ACE pyramid. And if you notice, this is preconception. We have a whole life perspective. So this is a whole lifetime, right? In our society, we are used to reacting, and usually we spend a lot of time in these top two parts. We spend a lot of time preventing death, right? So think about diseases that are deadly, right? Cancer, pulmonary heart disease, cardiac disease. We spend a lot of time trying to prevent it or cure it, or just regular disease, disability, and social problems. We try to attack once there is a problem, right? I am within the prevention unit. Now, the interesting thing is here, we have ACEs at the bottom, right? Adverse childhood experiences. We're going to talk about a little bit what that is, or what they named it in the study. That in turn leads to social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, because it has an impact there, which may lead to health risk and behaviors, which in turn leads to those negative outcomes, right? Now, a couple of things have happened since that time. This is the advanced pyramid, right? Usually I can give you about 2 or 3. This is the last version. In the last version, you're going to see a couple of things. You're going to see the adaptation that we talked about, but you're also going to see the integration of historical trauma and intergenerational adversity. Okay. Now, what that means is that we have communities in the world, not just in the United States, that have gone through historical trauma and have intergenerational adversity. And that in turn, with all the knowledge that we know now, we know has influenced the neurodevelopment and the epigenetic influences, meaning that this trauma can be passed on from generation to generation. Okay. I'll say it again. This trauma can be passed on from generation to generation at a genetic level. Okay. That meaning like chromosomes and things, and the thing that goes like this. Okay. I'll give you an example. How did they find this out? There were a group of rats. There was an experiment. There were a group of rats, and they were taught to be afraid of the smell of cherry blossom. Okay. Whenever they smelled cherry blossom, they were taught to be afraid and cower. Okay. So what they did is, you had these rats that were afraid of cherry blossoms. Then they took their great-great-great-great-grandchildren who have never been exposed to cherry blossoms before. They had no experience with cherry blossoms. And what do you think happened when they were exposed to cherry blossoms? You can put in the chat, you can scream it out, but Yep, 500 bonus points. I see some spot. They were afraid, right? That's intergenerational trauma distributed, right? And that's a real thing because it can influence. Now, with the prevention of ACEs, we can stop that intergenerational transmission as well, right? That's why this is so important. That's why this conversation gains even more importance, because we can stop that intergenerational transmission. And that is huge right now. Okay. So the ACE study took place at the end of the 1990s. So this was over 20 years ago. And this was, if you're big on research, you can Google it. There is a ton of information on the ACE study. But basically, these two scientists, they stumbled upon this. They weren't even trying to do this study the way that it happened. They found one worked at Kaiser Permanente, right? The other worked at the CDC, and they were seeing issues with their clients. And at first, I think they were trying to study cardiac disease, and they saw a lot of cardiac disease, and a lot of their clients had a bunch. So this is one of the largest studies ever. I believe the sample size was about 15,000 people. Not only that, FYI, the original study was made with Kaiser Permanente clients, meaning in Southern California, about more than 80% of the people in the study were middle or upper class Caucasian with either a college degree or more. So this is an elite group of individuals who also had complete access to healthcare because they were clients of Kaiser Permanente, right? We were not talking about individuals living below the poverty level. No, this is mostly affluent, middle class or upper middle class educated Caucasian community. And what you see here are the numbers. So there were 10 categories that were chosen for the study. There's household dysfunction, which included for the child, either they were witness of, so they can be a witness of substance abuse. There was substance abuse in the home, parent separation or divorce. So just having divorce within the family, mental illness in the family, seeing a battered mother. So seeing one of your parents being had violence upon them, or criminal behavior in the home. With neglect, we have emotional and physical neglect, and abuse, you have emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, right? Now, those are the 10 ACEs. So usually you would hear something like, oh, I have 4 to 5 ACEs. I have 4 ACEs. I have 1 ACE. I have 2 ACEs. Let me see what I have and what I don't have. Okay. I will say a couple of things here because I don't have all of my slides, but I want to make one thing very clear. The ACE study is an epidemiological study. I always struggle with that word, so I'm not even going to try again. But basically, it's a public health study, so it gives us a snapshot of the community. I say that because this is not a clinical assessment where I can say, oh, I have 4 ACEs, so this is what we do, right? Because this is the one thing. I could have 4 ACEs, and I'll give you, because I always self-disclose, I can have 4 to 6 ACEs depending on the day, depending on how I interpret certain things in my life, right? That's pretty high. You'll learn to say. But my 4 ACEs could have lesser impact than 1 ACE. Why? Because I could have separation or divorce, emotional neglect, emotional abuse, and maybe physical abuse, and that's my 4 ACEs. But you may have a child who was sexually abused every day for 10 years. Okay? And they have a 1. Right? So this isn't a 4 versus 1 scenario, because it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be a sociological snapshot into our communities and what we can do about it, right? And what they found is that they found connections between multiple forms of adversity and how they affect public health problems. Now, I'll bring you something else. These are just the 10 they picked. I want you to think of, in your communities, in your families, in your state, right? What other forms of childhood experiences can have adverse effects on children? Because there's plenty. You can put them in the chat if you like, right? We're talking about immigration. We're talking about family health status. We're talking about any sort of adverse experiences within their community, whether it be community violence. Are the statistics the same or close for different ethnic groups? Yes. So because it's a 20+ year study. They've been replicating over and over again, right? And because the sample size was so big, the numbers don't move that much. Yeah, we see Alex Stevens bullying, conflict of country, neglect. I mean, over and over again. And what we found is, I'll show you, the more adverse experiences, the more the impact, right? It doesn't lessen the impact if you have more experiences. But to Yvonne's question, I believe it was, yes, very, very much so. And sometimes it's going to be higher depending on other variables, but these numbers, I mean, we're talking about, let me see. So to give you an example, this is what I was talking about, the dose response relationship. Dose response means the more you add to it, the more it goes. It's like a car. So the more gas you give it, the lower it goes. So as the number of ACEs in the individual go up, right? The percentage with health problems does the same thing. If you're looking at 4 or more ACEs, you're looking over 40%, right? And I want you to take that into consideration, because 40% is a huge number when we're talking about public health, right? When we're talking about individuals with 4 or more ACEs, just to give you an example, one ACE, more than 30% of our population has more than one ACE. That means that it's also correlated with about 15% of the population. And when you talk about 15% of the population, you're talking about millions of children. You're talking about millions of adults, right? Those are huge, huge percentages. So what did they found in the ACE study? One, there's high ACE scores in our population, right? So if we were to do ACEs in our population, over 30% have more than one, over 15% have 4 or more ACEs. There's an increased risk of multiple health and social problems, right? So it's not just one category. What it does, it rises the level of bunch of major negative outcomes. And we found the intergenerational transmission of ACEs, right? So if I have ACEs, right, if I have average childhood experiences, I am more likely to transmit those in my family and in my community. So this is a very interesting graph that I won't bore you with the details, but basically you see a bunch of stuff on the outside. And these are negative outcomes that we see usually in our communities. The big oil spill in the middle is the percentage of that problem that's attributed to ACEs. Okay. Now, some of them are really high. You look here, you see about 55% in anxiety, 54 with marijuana use, disability, interrupted delay, almost 50%, life dissatisfaction, we see about 67%. That percentage is really high, right? Suicide, 67%, 61% of work disturbance. Okay, those 60s are really, really high. Now, this is a hopeful slide. I know it doesn't seem like it, but it is hopeful in the sense that if I can reduce the oil spill, I can reduce all of these at the same time, right? This is why that pyramid, we flip it on its head. I don't have to concentrate on the upper hand of the pyramid. I can make a real impact on the bottom end of the pyramid and have great success. That's why we talk about ACEs, because the common cause, everyone can contribute to this, and we can prevent the accumulation of ACEs. And we can prevent not only the accumulation of ACEs, but when I talked about that positive impact, we can also have a positive impact in the development of resiliency. And I'm going to talk about it today. So this is where I sort of take a strong left hand or left turn, because I want to get off the ACEs train and get on the resiliency train and get on the what can we do about it. Okay. So for Debbie, here's how is a define ACEs. Is there a specific list? So the 10 categories that I showed you, that is the original ACEs list, right? And it is not, you'll see if you Google it, it'll be a checklist about 10 different questions. Originally, just for your own purposes, it wasn't 10. It is about 200 questions, right? So it's much more extensive as a research study. Sometimes I will give it out in a group so people can do an inventory of what their ACEs are. I am very cautious about it because of the time. I would never do it today, because I would give you a 15-minute lecture on what it means and what it doesn't mean. Because at an individual level, it doesn't mean anything. Because I can say, oh, you have 5, or oh my God, I need to see someone. No, that's not how necessarily it works. It gives you a good idea of what my story was, and how I can relate to other people. Right. But to that effect, Debbie, that's what it was. It was a list of 10 different things, and they asked it in like 5 different ways. Have you ever experienced, usually what has the child witnessed, or what have they been a victim of within the family? But those were the 10 original. There are some studies that have been done that take into account other things like neighborhood violence, country of origin violence, where if they have been any sort of trauma because of have they been in a war zone, little things like that have been slowly incorporated into that. And it is a call to action. Somebody said it was a direct message. I won't say who, but yes, this is a call. This is the call to action section of the PowerPoint. So, okay, I'm going to read this because I think it's very poignant. Nurturing the healthy development of these protective systems afford the most important preparation or inoculation for overcoming potential threats and adversities in human development. Similarly, damage or destruction of these systems has dire consequences for the positive and adaptive capacity of individuals. So I didn't notice it because I haven't done this presentation until last week when I went through it, that it has the word inoculation in it, which is fairly relative to our time, right, with vaccine and COVID, because what we're trying to do is exactly that. We're trying to prevent as much as possible, right? We're trying to be preventive with ACEs. And this is how we can be preventive in individuals having ACEs and individuals transmitting those ACEs forward, right? And those are the 3 protective systems you see on the left: capabilities, attachment and belonging, and then we have community, culture, and spirituality. So individual capability is as simple as you think it is, right? Positive view lets me know I am important and valuable. So it seems big. These are little things. I bring them today because I think that each and every one of you is in a position where you can do this, where basically you can work with another human being and give them a better view of themselves and feel them they are capable. Children, for example, thrive when they feel capable, when I feel hopeful that I can change my environment, where what I can do is worth it and it's valuable, right? That's being hopeful. Hopeful is just that I have the capacity to change my environment or do something that matters. Attachment and belonging. I love this picture because I really love my grandmother. Relationships with caring and competent people are vital contributors to resiliency and recovery. I always say the same thing. I told you already that I have 4 to 6 ACEs, depending on where I am. I also have a grandmother that calls me her king. Now, do you think that that relationship was vital to my resiliency and recovery? Regardless of what you think, I can guarantee you it does, because those are the relationships that matter. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have my grandmother to thrive. I'm saying that relationships with caring and competent people make a difference. When we talked about Brené Brown, we're not just talking about empathy, we're talking about connection. And connection can be had between humans, period. It doesn't matter what that relationship is, as long as there's a connection. That's why you can be part of the attachment and belonging, right? Because attachment doesn't have to be that we're a partner or that you're my family. It just means that I feel a part of my community, that I feel a part of something, that I feel that I belong, right? And that is invaluable. And last but not least, we have community, faith, and cultural process. Connect before you correct. Yes, yes. Well, I'll give you another example because I saw something in the chat. The #1 predictor, I come from a clinical background, the #1 predictor for a therapist and patient relationship, regardless of intelligence, skill set, toolkit, money, whatever, the #1 predictor is rapport. That means relationship and connection. That's all that means. If I can connect to another person, I build a relationship. If I can connect to a community, I build faith and cultural process, right? I build this sense of belonging, right? This we, I build a we, right? And then I foster thriving communities. And that's part of it, is me connecting with another human being, me connecting to a community. Now, So there's 4 resilience factors that make a difference, and they're more powerful when we layer up, right? These are not mutually exclusive. So feeling social, emotional support and hope. That can be with the people around you, your community, your family, your friends, having 2 or more people who help. When I say help, these are not big things. I give the example every time in AHC, for example, it just might mean that I could go ask my neighbor for sugar. That's help, right? I need 2 eggs for baking. I know that I can rely on my neighbors or I need a ride to the store, for example. Community reciprocity in watching out for children, intervening when they're in trouble, or doing favors for one another. There's a safety within that community that we can rely on each other, and there's a sense of belonging. And then social bridging means that people reach outside their social circle to get help for their family and friends. So staying outside of your bubble. I know this is harder. It's less hard now, but this was really hard when COVID hit because, you know, we were told isolate and literally stay in your bubble, right? So this comes literally against with connection. And we know that communities are powerful. We know that community is a living spiritual entity supported by every responsible adult, and communities can foster connection, right? Just like it can not necessarily be a bridge of support, it could be the bridge that takes you to support and connection. And the change is up to us. I mean, you want more, what is it, call to action? It's shaped by our thoughts, our conversations, the way we relate with one another in relationships, families, and communities. Because I feel that ACEs allow us to take a look at our story. It allows us to open the space for see others' stories and better relate, right? It changes the dynamic for me to see the other person in front of me and what they've been through. With children, for example, it allows me to take a step back and see what's going on, really. Because children have a really hard time on expressing what it is that they're going through, right? Some adults do too, because they were that child, right? I'll tell you this one story, and I'll cut it close because I think I'm towards the end. I put some resources up on the screen, and I'll give Laura this so it could be sent out to all of you so you have it, and I'll do a breakdown. But I was doing a presentation, was the same presentation with somebody who worked in the school system, not in Arlington, so I won't get in trouble. And she worked with children with behavior issues, and this child was screaming. And he's been screaming for a little bit. So he's been screaming for about an hour. And the first thing that came to mind when she was telling me the story is that at some point in time in this child's life, his brain went into fight or flight, and something told him, scream for safety, right? Something told him, you're in danger, scream now. And it either worked, or it got reaffirmed, or that is his adaptation, right? But if I hear the adaptation, if all I hear is the screaming, I never see the child inside. I don't see the pain. I don't see whatever it is, the process within that child, right? And that's what ACEs afforded me, is that little buffer of knowing that something's going on with that person. And I don't connect with the screaming, I connect with the child. That's where the connection lies, right? Is seeing the empathy behind the behavior. Okay, let me see. Okay, my contact info. These are just a couple of things. You can take a picture of this. I will send this out because I do have this as a slide. This is just reference for, you know, if you are a child that you know needs some extra support, these are a couple of things. We do have emergency crisis. We have emergency services with Arlington County. We also have Children's Mobile Crisis, which is with CR2. Children's Behavioral Health Care, which is the county. Now that number, that 228-1560, you can call that number for anything. I've been told directly, those are my coworkers, and they've told me, Leo, just give that number out. If you have any questions, if you don't know what to do, if you have a child that needs a little bit of support, if you have a family that lives in Alexandria, but you don't know where to call, doesn't matter, just call us. Because even if we can't serve you, we might be able to tell you who can serve you or what services they can access or who they can call. Yes, so Debbie, I almost made, so Debbie's mentioned that screaming may mean a child is on the spectrum or has a learning disorder. I was this close, Debbie, you called me out on it, because I almost said that obviously there's some children that do have either emotional or developmental disability, and they do express themselves in different ways. I did have a conversation today that was very, very enlightening with a friend that does that same work, where the development disability doesn't cause the distress, but the development disability allows me to gauge what the best way to work with the distress is. Right. So, and I'm saying it quickly, but that's something that I had a really good conversation about that today. Yes. Okay. I'm out of time. I know you guys have a lot to do with. So yes, elastic, capable of rewinding. Yes. I will say this, so to Ty, fortunately, brains are elastic and capable of rewinding for the better, not just the worse. Every neuron can matter, every interaction. So Ty Mitchell, yes. So like I said, behavior and experience is going to mold development and brain development, right? Now, I was in a workshop, not a workshop, she was giving a speech. She is the Surgeon General of California, I believe now, Nadine Burke-Harris. She is a huge proponent of ACEs. You can Google her. She has TED Talks. And she did say something that caught my hand. I remember I was on my phone and I wasn't even paying attention because I've heard her a number of times. And all of a sudden she goes, there is a percentage of ACEs you cannot get rid of. And I was like, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, what are you talking about, Nadine Burke-Harris? And she's like, when you factor in everything, there is a percentage of brain development coming from adverse childhood experiences that you can't get rid of. I mean, it's like a 10, 15, 20%. And I was like, what do you mean? I work out, I eat carrots, I try to meditate and pray and all that. And she's like, that's just because it comes to the point. What I like to emphasize is that all experience affects our development, right? It doesn't mean that we have to have a rosy childhood. It just means that resiliency that Ty was talking about, that neuroplasticity, right? The good experience also gets stored there. That's why these relationships can be invaluable. That's why these relationships at a community, family level, that's why each of you can actually make an impact, right? You don't have to be a superhero to make an impact. You can make an impact in small little ways.
Wow, that is a perfect ending note for me as the volunteer coordinator to say that, yes, our volunteers are making an impact. You are building relationships, you're caring and competent. So we really appreciate the work that you do. I think that I see at least one more question in the chat, and we'll probably end up with more. So we can continue this conversation. I can just filter some questions through to Leo later, because I do want to save some time for everybody to go into their breakout room. So let me make sure that I can make that happen. Breakout rooms. And you do not have to come back to the main room after your breakout room. We're going to be getting right close to 6 o'clock. So I'll say